one of the greatest psychologists in history, left a crucial warning for humanity. He cautioned that dangerous mistakes are wrecking the lives of those who confront their inner darkness, and those who avoid it altogether. Let me walk you through the 5 most perilous mistakes people make when dealing with their shadow, and more importantly, how to unlock a hidden superpower by overcoming them. The first major misconception: believing that the shadow is nothing more than your dark, evil, or negative traits, something to suppress or eliminate. But Carl Jung argued that the shadow also contains untapped potential and creative energy. He described it as, on one hand, a regrettable and troublesome weakness, but on the other, a vital source of instinct and a stepping stone to higher awareness. Why? Because buried within your shadow are not just fears and envy, but also hidden talents and opportunities, qualities that remain repressed because society, or even you, deemed them unacceptable. Jung warned that rejecting these aspects of yourself stunts your personal growth, a process he called individuation. And make no mistake, this isn't just some abstract concept. It's a real-life superpower. But before we get to that, let's talk about why ignoring or suppressing your shadow is truly dangerous. Jung made it clear: if people refuse to acknowledge the reality of their own darkness, they will never take responsibility for it. As long as we treat evil as something that exists only outside of us, figures like Hitler and Stalin will be dismissed as mere exceptions rather than cautionary examples of what lies dormant in all human beings. Jung emphasized that we must recognize the shadow as an intrinsic part of ourselves, something to be understood, not fought against, something to integrate rather than destroy. Take Sheena, for instance. Years ago, she got fired after bluntly telling her co-worker Wendy that her hairstyle was outdated. The experience was so jarring that she repressed her natural honesty for an entire decade, but eventually she found a way to channel her raw authenticity through writing. She became a successful reviewer of underground romance novels, turning what she once saw as a flaw into a strength. However, failing to acknowledge your shadow's hidden gifts leads directly into mistake number 2, turning shadow work into self-punishment. Jung wrote that guilt is necessary for psychological growth. Without it, there can be no true expansion of the mind or spirit. But there's a crucial difference between acknowledging guilt and drowning in it. If you let guilt consume you, it pushes your repressed traits even deeper into the unconscious, where they continue to control you from behind the scenes. A recently published study reinforces Jung's insight. Instead of being trapped in guilt and shame, we should treat these emotions as signals for change. The goal isn't endless self-punishment. It's learning, making amends, and evolving. This shift in perspective allows negative experiences to become catalysts for transformation. But even if you grasp this concept, all your efforts could still go to waste if you fall into mistake number 3, believing that shadow work is about becoming flawless. Jung warned that the goal isn't to turn yourself into some kind of moral perfectionist. It's to become fully human. Western philosophy often promotes filling the conscious mind with idealized notions of goodness, but Jung argued that true enlightenment comes not from imagining ourselves as beings of pure light, but by acknowledging and integrating our darkness. And let's be honest, that's not always a comfortable process, which is why so many people avoid it. Perfection is an illusion. It denies the complexity of human nature, the blend of light and dark, strengths and weaknesses that makes you, well, you. Jung emphasized that rejecting your imperfections distances you from the parts of yourself that have the most to teach you. That's why real shadow work isn't about fixing yourself. It's about embracing who you truly are and finding productive ways to channel your full potential. But what if the very search for your true self is misleading you? That brings us to mistake number 4, believing that shadow work is a solo journey. Some think their shadow is purely personal, something that exists in isolation. But in reality, your shadow is shaped by culture, family, history, and the world around you. Friends, enemies, and life events act as mirrors, reflecting back the hidden parts of yourself that you might otherwise never notice. Shadow work, much like the shadow itself, is collective in nature. Think you've made progress? Life has a way of testing that. You might believe you've mastered your inner demons until someone triggers you, and suddenly you realize you're not as evolved as you thought. Yes, self-reflection requires solitude, but external experiences are just as crucial. Take Bruce, for example. He spent years caught in a toxic rivalry with Jack, seeing him as nothing more than an adversary. But after deep reflection and some outside perspectives, Bruce realized that Jack wasn't just his enemy, he was his mirror. They were opposites on the surface, sure, but deep down, Bruce knew he shared some of Jack's chaotic tendencies. The difference? Bruce chose to confront and manage those impulses instead of letting them consume him. He started recognizing when his Jack side influenced his actions and found healthier ways to express it through freedom, adaptability, and play. This is what Jung called shadow integration. And that leads us to the most fatal mistake of all, letting the shadow take control. When Jack heard about Jung's shadow work, he decided to try it. But unlike Bruce and Sheena, who learned to integrate their dark sides in a constructive way, Jack took a different approach. He mistook shadow work for full surrender to his worst impulses. Instead of balancing his darkness, he let it consume him, indulging in cruelty, chaos, and destruction. By completely identifying with his shadow, Jack lost the very thing that could have saved him: individuation. Jung saw individuation as the process of becoming a whole, authentic self, bringing together all the conscious and unconscious aspects of your psyche. True integration is about owning every part of who you are and using it wisely. But if you don't navigate these shadow pitfalls carefully, individuation will remain nothing more than a distant dream. Yet, there is still one last truth, one final revelation that ties everything together. A truth so profound that it may completely alter the way you see yourself and the world. In the next and final section, we will uncover it, because there is one last piece of Nietzsche's vision that brings everything into focus. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Are you ready for the ultimate truth? Now we arrive at the final and most unsettling realization, the truth that binds everything together. If we have followed Nietzsche's path this far, we have dismantled the illusion of absolute morality. We have questioned the foundations of good and evil. We have confronted the will to power, the necessity of self-created values, and the challenge of living a life worthy of eternal recurrence. But now comes the ultimate question. If we reject inherited morality, if we take full responsibility for our existence, if we forge our own values, then what happens to meaning itself? This is the terrifying heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. For once we strip away the inherited structures that have guided humanity for centuries, once we move beyond good and evil, what remains? What prevents us from collapsing into nihilism, into the belief that life itself is meaningless? Nietzsche's greatest warning is that the death of God is not merely the collapse of religion, it is the collapse of meaning as we know it. When he proclaimed, "God is dead," it was not a triumphant declaration, but a foreboding caution. The end of traditional morality does not automatically lead to liberation. It creates a void that must either be filled with new values or with despair. And so, Nietzsche's final challenge is the most difficult of all. Can you create your own meaning? Without reliance on inherited beliefs, without seeking validation from others, can you look at existence in its purest form and say, "Yes, this is enough"? This is the ultimate test of the overman, not merely to reject the old, but to build something new, to impose meaning upon a meaningless world. So the choice is yours. Will you rise to this challenge or retreat into the safety of the familiar? Nietzsche's philosophy does not offer comfort, it offers awakening. The only question left is, what will you do with it? This is where Nietzsche's philosophy transcends theory and becomes a call to action. Because if you take eternal recurrence seriously, you can no longer afford to waste time. You can no longer live in fear. Every decision becomes infinitely significant, not just for today, but for eternity. So ask yourself, if this moment were to last forever, would you be content? Are you living in a way that you would willingly repeat for all eternity? If the answer is no, then what is stopping you from reshaping your life, from becoming the master of your own fate? Nietzsche's philosophy is not for the faint of heart. It demands courage, responsibility, and an unbreakable will. It asks you to stand alone, to reject the comforting lies of conventional morality, and to embrace the raw, unfiltered reality of existence. But for those who dare to walk this path, the reward is unlike anything most will ever experience: true, unshackled freedom. But let's pause and reflect. How many people truly live this way? How many of us accept our lives as they are, without wishing for escape, without hoping for some final reward or divine justice? Most live,